I was standing at the sink, rinsing a mug I didn't need to rinse yet. The water ran longer than necessary, the sound steady and familiar, filling the kitchen with something that felt like order. My wife had left 5 minutes earlier: milk, bread, the usual things that make absence feel harmless because it's temporary. The kind of leaving that promises return without needing to say it out loud. The house had settled into its afternoon quiet, the kind I always trusted. Not silence exactly, but a calm arrangement of small sounds: the refrigerator humming, the pipes resting, the world behaving the way it was supposed to. My daughter stood in the doorway. I hadn't heard her approach. One moment the doorway was empty, the next she was there, small and still, like she'd been placed carefully into the frame. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. There was no drama in her posture, no frantic movement that might have explained urgency in an easy way. She whispered instead, her voice low and careful, like she was afraid the house itself might hear her. "We have to get out. Right now." I smiled without thinking. Not a mocking smile, nothing cruel or dismissive. It was automatic, reflexive. The kind of smile adults use when they assume imagination is warming up, when they believe a story is forming and just needs gentle steering back toward reality. I didn't turn off the water immediately. I didn't feel the need to. "Why?" I asked. She lifted her hand and pointed upstairs. Her arm shook, not dramatically. There was no wild trembling, no exaggerated fear. Just enough movement to catch my attention even while my brain was already drafting explanations. Old houses make noise. Children notice things adults filter out. Fear looks bigger when you're small. "We don't have time," she said. "We have to leave this house now." I remember the way she said "this house." Not our house. The difference was subtle, almost easy to miss. It should have slowed me down. It should have made me pause, maybe even ask another question. It didn't. At the time, it felt like word choice, nothing more. I laughed once, softly. More breath than sound. "Hey, it's okay. What did you hear, pipes again?" She shook her head. She didn't elaborate. She didn't try to convince me or dress the moment up with details. She just stood there looking at me, waiting. It felt like she'd already said everything she was going to say, like the responsibility had shifted entirely onto me. The silence stretched between us. I became aware of a faint irritation, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly. It was the irritation of being interrupted, of adult order disrupted by child urgency. I told myself fear didn't need encouragement. I told myself that checking upstairs would only feed whatever story she'd built in her head. Curiosity, I reasoned, could be just as harmful as dismissal. Then she grabbed my sleeve. Not hard. Not frantic. There was no desperation in the gesture. Just enough pressure to communicate urgency without drama, as if she understood that too much force might weaken her case instead of strengthening it. Something in me shifted. Not belief, exactly. I didn't suddenly accept that something was wrong. It was discomfort. The quiet recognition that if I ignored this and something did happen, I'd never forgive myself, even if the odds said nothing would. The thought settled heavily, not as fear, but as responsibility. "Okay," I said, already reaching for my keys. The decision surprised me as I spoke it. "We're going for a drive." She didn't ask where. That should have been another warning. She simply turned and walked toward the door, as if the outcome had already been decided long before she spoke to me, as if she had only been waiting to see whether I would listen or not. I didn't check upstairs. The thought crossed my mind only briefly, more as a formality than a real consideration, and I dismissed it just as quickly. I didn't call my wife either. That would have required explanation, and explanation would have turned this into something larger than I wanted it to be. I framed everything carefully in my mind as precaution, not fear. A short drive, fresh air, distance, enough to let the moment pass without giving it weight. I told myself the police station was public, safe, rational. A place defined by rules and visibility. A place where imagination couldn't follow, where whatever story my daughter had formed would lose its shape under fluorescent lights and official desks. It felt like a logical destination, even if I didn't say it out loud. The car started on the first turn of the key. The sound grounded me, familiar and reassuring. My daughter climbed in quickly, not rushing but not hesitating either, and buckled herself without being told. The click of the seatbelt came too easily. Like this wasn't the first time she'd imagined leaving in a hurry. That thought brushed against me and moved on before I could hold it. As we pulled away, I glanced at the house. Everything looked exactly the same as it always had. The windows were quiet, reflecting the pale afternoon light. The front door was closed, locked, unremarkable. There was nothing visibly wrong, nothing that announced danger or even disorder. No movement, No sign that anything inside had changed at all. That should have comforted me. Instead, it irritated me. The irritation surprised me with its sharpness. I didn't like that the house looked innocent, that it offered no justification for the decision I'd made. It felt almost defiant in its normalcy, as if it were silently questioning me. I looked away and focused on the road, telling myself that normal appearances didn't prove anything either way. We made it halfway down the block before I noticed my daughter twisting in her seat. She leaned toward the window, craning her neck to look through the rear glass, her small hands gripping the edge of the seat for balance. Her attention wasn't on me or the road ahead. It was fixed behind us. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice light. "It's okay." I wanted the words to settle her, to mark the moment as complete. A beginning and an end. A simple reassurance to close the subject. She didn't answer. She kept watching. Her focus was steady, unblinking, as if she were afraid that looking away, even for a second, might change something she needed to see. I resisted the urge to check the mirror again, telling myself not to mirror her behavior, not to validate whatever fear had taken hold. We were 2 streets away when the lights appeared behind us, red and blue. Sudden, authoritative. They filled the rearview mirror so completely that there was no mistaking their intent. My heart jumped before my mind could catch up, that involuntary surge that comes when authority arrives without invitation. I pulled over immediately, muscle memory taking over, movements precise and practiced. The car idled. The lights continued to flash. An officer approached on my side, one hand raised in a calm, practiced signal. Another patrol car passed us, slowed, then turned hard back toward our street, tires whispering against the asphalt as it changed direction. "Sir," the officer said, his voice controlled, professional, stripped of unnecessary emotion. "We need you to stay here." "What's going on?" I asked. The question came out tighter than I intended. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze shifted past me into the back seat. My daughter met his eyes without flinching. There was no fear in her expression now, no urgency either. Just something settled, almost finished. "She's the one," he said quietly into his radio. The words landed with weight, even though I didn't yet understand them. They weren't meant for me, but they changed the air inside the car all the same. I felt suddenly out of place, like I'd stepped into the middle of a conversation that had started long before I arrived. I looked at my daughter then, really looked at her, and for the first time since leaving the house, I didn't try to explain anything away. Another officer came around the front of the car, his presence quieter but no less deliberate. He stood close enough that I could see the lines of concentration in his face, the practiced neutrality that comes from asking questions whose answers matter. "Your address," he asked. I gave it to him without hesitation. Saying it out loud felt strangely formal, as if I were reciting something that no longer quite belonged to me. He nodded once, already processing it. "We've had a call," he said. "A neighbor reported someone entering your home through a rear access point about 15 minutes ago." 15 minutes, the number echoed in my head, louder than it should have. It aligned too neatly with everything that had just happened. With my wife leaving, with me standing at the sink, with my daughter appearing in the doorway. I opened my mouth, instinctively preparing to respond, to clarify, to correct something. Then I closed it. There's no sign of forced entry from the front. The officer continued, his tone even. "If you'd been inside," he stopped himself. It wasn't hesitation. It was restraint. The kind professionals use when the rest of the sentence doesn't add clarity, only weight. He didn't need to finish it. I finished it for him, silently, the thought forming fully and painfully on its own. My daughter exhaled. Just once. It was quiet, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. Like someone letting go of something they'd been holding tightly for too long. The sound carried more meaning than any of the words exchanged so far. I realized then that whatever fear she'd felt hadn't been sudden. It hadn't started when she spoke to me. It had been there before, waiting. The officers told us to stay where we were. Their instructions were calm, efficient, unquestioned. More cars passed us, lights flashing briefly as they moved on. The street I had left so confidently minutes earlier was now sealed off in the distance, cut cleanly from the rest of the neighborhood. Familiar houses stood behind police tape, transformed by context alone. I sat there with my hands resting on the steering wheel, aware of their position as if they belonged to someone else. My grip wasn't tight. It wasn't shaking. What I felt wasn't panic. It was understanding. Something unfamiliar and unwelcome settled in my chest, the collapse of certainty. Not the dramatic kind that arrives with chaos, but the quiet kind that arrives with clarity. The kind that doesn't ask permission. I thought back to myself at the sink, to the laugh, to the ease with which I had assumed control of the situation without actually understanding it. I hadn't laughed because she was wrong. That truth settled with uncomfortable precision. I'd laughed because I was sure I was right. Time moved strangely after that, slowly, but without pause. Eventually, one of the officers returned. He stood beside the driver's side window, posture relaxed but attentive. "You did the right thing leaving," he said. It wasn't praise. There was no warmth in it. It was assessment. A conclusion drawn from facts rather than emotion. "Whoever it was didn't take anything," he continued. "They left when they realized the house wasn't empty." Wasn't empty. The phrase echoed differently than the rest. It suggested presence without visibility. Awareness without proof. I thought about my daughter standing in the doorway, whispering. Waiting, not reacting, not panicking, just informing me as if she'd already done the calculation and arrived at the only outcome that mattered. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I was acknowledging. The officer stepped back, already turning his attention elsewhere. The moment had passed for him. It hadn't for me. I looked at my daughter again. She sat quietly now, her body no longer tense, her gaze no longer fixed behind us. Whatever task she'd set for herself was finished. She didn't look proud. She didn't look relieved. She just looked present. The street lights flickered faintly as dusk began to settle in, unnoticed by everyone except me. I realized then that something fundamental had shifted, not in the world, but in how I understood my place in it. The assumption that I was the one who knew best no longer felt solid. It felt fragile, and I knew, without needing to say it out loud, that this moment would follow me far longer than the flashing lights or the police tape ever would. My wife arrived later, frantic and breathless, her car pulling up too fast, her movements sharp with the kind of fear that arrives after the danger has already passed. She didn't ask questions right away. She didn't wait for explanations. She crossed the distance between us in seconds and wrapped our daughter in her arms, holding her so tightly that for a moment I thought she might disappear inside that embrace. My daughter didn't resist. She didn't cry either. She folded into it naturally, like this was where she'd been heading all along. No one scolded. No one raised their voice or tried to correct the timeline. There was no misplaced reassurance, no insistence that everything was fine now. The facts stood on their own, heavy and sufficient. Anything extra would have felt dishonest. Eventually, we went home. The house looked the same. Of course it did. That was part of what made it difficult to stand inside it again. The furniture hadn't moved. The air hadn't changed. There was no visible evidence that anything had entered or left. But the quiet felt altered, not broken. Not threatening, just different. Less reliable. That night, after everything had settled back into stillness, after doors were locked and lights dimmed and the world resumed its ordinary rhythms, my daughter came and sat beside me on the couch. She didn't climb into my lap. She didn't ask for anything. She leaned against my arm, not seeking comfort exactly, just contact. Just proof that I was there. We sat like that for a while. The television was off. The house made its usual noises, but I noticed each one now, cataloging them without meaning to. Pipes, floorboards. The subtle sounds I used to trust. "Next time," she said softly, her voice barely louder than the space between us, "don't laugh." There was no accusation in her tone. No anger. She wasn't asking for an apology or trying to explain herself. It was instruction, delivered calmly, the way you tell someone where the light switch is when the room is dark. "I won't," I said. The words came easily. Meaning them was more complicated. I meant it in the moment fully and without reservation. I also knew it wasn't a promise I'd get to prove easily. Situations like this don't repeat themselves neatly. They leave impressions instead. She stayed where she was, her weight steady against my arm. When she finally stood up to go to bed, she did so without ceremony, as if nothing more needed to be said. I watched her disappear down the hallway, aware that something essential had already been settled between us. Authority hadn't arrived to save us. That realization came quietly, long after the lights and voices and movement were gone. The police had done their job. They had confirmed facts, secured space, restored order. But they hadn't been the reason we were safe. They had arrived to confirm something I'd almost dismissed. That certainty is not the same as safety. That listening is not weakness. I had always believed that calm meant control. That confidence was something you earned through experience and logic. That night, I understood how fragile that belief was. How easily it could become a liability. My certainty hadn't protected us. It had nearly delayed us. The house is still our house. I sleep in the same bedroom. I walk the same halls. I rinse mugs at the same sink. Nothing has been rearranged, replaced, or repaired. There's no visible scar to mark what happened. But I don't trust it's quiet the way I used to. Quiet used to mean safe. Now it just means unchallenged. And I don't trust my certainty at all. Not the automatic kind. Not the kind that smiles before it listens. I pay attention now to hesitation, to discomfort, to the moments that don't announce themselves loudly. I think about my daughter standing in the doorway, whispering, waiting. Not demanding belief, just asking not to be dismissed. Some lessons arrive gently. Others arrive disguised as interruptions. This one arrived as a whisper. And I know now that the most important thing I can do, the next time someone speaks like that, is not to decide whether they're right or wrong, but to listen before I'm sure.